Today we're beginning into the second half of the book of Ecclesiastes, and for a large portion of the beginning of this year, we've spent some time in this book. And just to kind of set your minds at ease, we're not going to spend 9 more weeks here on the second half. In the second half of the book, chapter 7 to 12, where we're going to go, it's going to be over 4 different messages. And so just to kind of give you the heads up as to where we're headed with the whole thing. And we're going to be diving into some really good material, some things that are going to be helpful for us. And if you have forgotten or weren't with us in the beginning of this series, Everything Under the Sun, you can go back and watch some of the videos on YouTube if you want to catch up. You can certainly do that. But we are going to be kind of picking up where we left off. And if you've forgotten kind of what this whole book was about, let me just kind of give you the brief recap. The book of Ecclesiastes is what we call a wisdom book in the Old Testament. And the book of Ecclesiastes is very much the record of one man's quest for meaning, purpose, and significance in this life. And he seeks to apply himself to every opportunity under the sun. His whole life, in a sense, becomes an experiment. He experiences things, he does things, he applies his wealth to things, he seeks out wisdom. There's so much about, he makes it his mission to find out what in this life can bring meaning, purpose, and significance. But he limits himself to that which is what he calls under the sun. And so as we think about what that means, it's really not a quest for the divine. It's not a quest even for God. It's not a quest for, what is it that heaven has to say, or is there any heavenly perspective? He's just looking horizontally. When I consider this life and I observe everything that can be observed, and I participate in all the things that I can participate in, and he has the means and the motive to try to work all these things out, what is it that brings lasting meaning, purpose, and significance? And although in the book of Ecclesiastes there are generic references to God, just kind of in general, again, his focus is on life here on earth. He recognizes there is a God, there is a divine being, but in his pursuits, it's what is under the sun. And so he sought out wisdom. He figured that would be the best place to start. If I can gain all the wisdom and knowledge in the world, maybe that will help me. And he moves to pleasure and self-seeking and indulgences of all different kinds. He looks for meaning, purpose, significance in amassing great wealth, in applying himself to his work and accomplishing and building projects and all the rest. He considers relationships with other people, whether that is judicial relationships, whether that's political relationships, whether that's friendships, all the relationships that you could think of in every category. He even goes on a quest about religion, and will religion satisfy and satiate this desire? And he speaks about life and legacy, and his conclusion is, after detailing his pursuits in all of these things, that they all come up short, that they themselves do not provide the lasting satisfaction of knowing that we will be remembered, that our life has some great meaning, purpose, or significance that even lasts beyond ourselves. And the one thing that he keeps repeating all the way through, the teacher or the preacher, the one who's wise, who's speaking all these things, the one word that he keeps repeating throughout is the word Hevel. Hevel. Everything is Hevel, which basically means mist, vapor, fog, cotton ball clouds. You think there is something to be grasped onto with it, and the minute you go to take hold of it, it just simply slips through your fingers like holding sand. And that's his conclusion all throughout. It's like chasing after the wind. We're always running, but never catching. None of it is lasting for him. And so he finds himself in this space of having a bit of an existential crisis, right? It's what is the purpose of my existence? Is my existence even worth? And I mean, this just sounds so depressing, doesn't it? I mean, there's this point in which when you read through Ecclesiastes, it's like you just got to set it down because it's like we can't take too much of this right now because it just seems like it's such a downer, right? Even just what I've referred to this morning, like I'm looking at your faces and you're like, can we just have something good? Can we just move on to something bright? Summer's coming. We got a picture of a sun up here. Like, can we just do something nice and fuzzy and warm? And yeah, like there's lots of things we could do, but listen, there is going to be some conclusion to this matter, okay? So hold on, because it is going to be helpful for us. I hope it has been already. But he finds himself in a bit of an existential crisis, right? And what is my existence, and what is its value, and what's it worth, and what is its purpose, and can there be meaning and significance? And as I said in the beginning, a lot of what we read here, I mean, I've read the book of Ecclesiastes quite a few times in my life, and it's never made more sense to me than since I turned 40. And to be honest, like I'm just saying, like there's something about that point. Now maybe for some of you, like 40 was nothing, right? But like I'm finding now, like I'm getting that existential crisis, okay? Like there's things in what he writes here that 10 years ago I would have said, yeah, that's probably true, but I'm just not there yet. You ever have that happen before? Like you think of things, it's like, yeah, that's probably true, and yeah, I can see how that might be the case, but then when you like are walking through the existential crisis, it's like, it makes more, like you understand it in a different way. And so over the next 4 weeks, so what we're going to do is we kind of work our way through the back half of this book is we're going to seek to answer the question, given all of that, is there any hope? Is there some good news conclusion to the matter? Is there any purposeful help to what the teacher has experienced and the conclusions that he draws? Spoiler, the answer is yes. Okay, so it can be helpful. There is some good news, there is some hope, and there is some purpose. But what we need is some perspective. And I think that's one of the biggest gifts that the book of Ecclesiastes offers us, is the gift of perspective. And speaking of perspective, that's what we're diving into today. Perspective, of course, is the ability to see things from a different angle, right? It's the ability to have a different view of something. So if you think of the first time you ever flew in a plane, if you've ever been in a plane, and you took off from the airport and you looked down and you saw the world in a whole different perspective, didn't you? Like you're not running through the streets. Your view is not limited by buildings. You're seeing a whole layout, bird's eye view of things. You have a different perspective. If you've ever climbed a mountain or got on top of a hill, you have a different perspective than what you do in the valley. If you're in the valley and you're looking around, you have a different perspective than what it's like to be on the side of the road heading up the mountain, right? So depending on where we're at and the experiences we've had and the things that we've learned along the way and the biases that we have obtained, we all carry a certain perspective towards life and towards, our view of the world. Now, I had this English professor at Atlantic Baptist University when I was there, Crandall now. His name was Dr. Mance. He was the English professor, and he was very much the English professor with the skewed hair and always wore the blazer, and so there's actually this one time where he was trying to teach us about something to do with poetry, and there was this poem that we were kind of looking at, and it described grapes and the juice of the grape as it was being bitten into, and he's doing his best, to capture with words, and he's like, just picture in your mind the experience of what this is like. And I raised my hand and I said, if we really wanted to, you should have brought us some grapes, and we could have all had some grapes as we read this, and then we really would have got it. And he kind of laughed. Anyway, the next class, he brought us all grapes. And so, ask and ye shall receive. So, but it's that kind of thing. And but one of the things that he would do at the very beginning of every English class, and we were warned this going into our first English class with him, we were warned of this. He would hold up a chalk holder, because he used still used chalk in that day. And he had the chalk holder, the silver one, I'm talking about from school, and teachers know. And if you had it and it had the little button on the top, it was like those pencils that you kind of push the lead out. And he had this chalk holder, and he would stand up in front of the class. He said, "No, here I have this chalk holder," and he kind of talked like that. "I have a chalk holder, and you're looking at the chalk holder from this perspective over here, and then you over there, you're looking at, and so from you looking at this angle, you see this side of it, but from you looking over here, you see the little clip that this side doesn't see the clip. And then, and he's saying, and if you're seated down here, you see the chalk coming out of the bottom, but if you're up there, you might not see the chalk coming out. All right, so he's kind of describing to us the whole point of, and so we're sitting in kind of the big lecture hall above the chapel, and he's, everybody's at a different perspective on the room, and he's trying to explain to us the point of perspective and why it matters, because a different perspective can help interrupt or disrupt your personal bias towards something. And it can be incredibly helpful to at least hear, if not experience, a different perspective on things. And so as we think about perspective, that's exactly what the teacher is telling us in chapter 7 in what Mark has read for us today, that when we have a perspective, that we need to hear and understand why some of these things that might sound counterintuitive to us in the beginning can actually be helpful for us. And so he's going to make some statements that we've already heard, and I'm going to read again. And some of the things he's going to say we might be quick to be dismissive of if we were just reading it, right? Okay, boomer, like whatever, okay? Like we might feel that way, but let's at least give him some consideration as we work our way through, okay? So starting in chapter 7, verse 1, this is where he begins. And we're going to have a bit of a smattering of points for us today, but I think it'll be good. So he says, a good name is better than what? Precious ointment, okay? And the day of death than the day of birth. And so right out of the gate, he's saying, look, a good name is better than expensive perfume or an abundance of oil or at least good oil, right? Nothing with like flies in it or little flecks of something or, it's this good, pure, strained, oil that if you have an abundance of it or the best of oil, right? In that day, it was a sign of wealth. It was a sign of riches. And what he's saying is that a good name or your reputation is better to have than excessive wealth. To which we would probably all go, probably true. I mean, maybe for some of us, we may say, well, if we could have the excessive wealth with it, that would be fine too. But if we had to choose one or the other, a good name is better than great riches. Because the truth of the matter is, which we kind of all know, that your competency can get you into the door of something. It can accomplish a lot for you. Your skills can be advantageous. If you're good at something, right, and if you're capable at a particular niche area or you've been trained in a particular thing, that can be really, really helpful for you. But if your character is not up to snuff, that's not going to keep you in the room. Your competence will only get you so far. Your character will make or break you. And here he's saying that a good name is better than excessive riches. A good name and a good reputation and being a person of integrity and of a character is more important than all of the rest of it. And then he says, and the day of death better than the day of birth. Now, again, I just think when you first read that, what's your gut reaction? Time out? Can we think this one through? Wouldn't we say that the day of birth is better than the day of death? Anybody with me on that one? If you were just to kind of ask without reading this first, because the Bible says, right? If I was just kind of first asked this morning, what's better, the day of birth or the day of death? Most of us would probably say, the day of birth. Why? Your whole life's ahead of you. There's so much opportunity to look forward to. There's so much that could be accomplished and gained and enjoyed. And, so just kind of generally we might say, well, I don't know if I really agree with that. Am I allowed to argue with the teacher here? Isn't the day of birth better because of all of those things? It sounds counterintuitive, but again, the theme continues in verse 2, and he says, it's better to go to the house of mourning than to the house of feasting. In other words, let's put it in plain language, it's better to go to a funeral home than to a restaurant, a great restaurant with good friends. To which, again, we would say, the place I'd rather be is Most of us, okay? If that's not your response, stay after and we'll have a chat. I just want to make sure you're okay, all right? So it's better to go to the funeral home than to the good restaurant with all of your friends. What is he saying? Why is he saying this? Well, it's better to experience death and loss. And again, we are not eager for these moments. I don't know anyone who's ever said, I can't wait to get to the funeral home for visitation. I can't wait to stand in line to, hug a family, or like, I just can't wait to go there and whatever we're going to do while we're there. Like if you had your pick, right? Good burger, good, let's do it, okay? So listen, but he's saying it's better to go to the house of mourning than to go to a good restaurant with good friends where you're free of trouble and can laugh and tell stories and, all of those kinds of things. That's the kind of stuff we look forward to. Can't wait till Friday night where we're all going out, where we're all going to fill in the blank. But what's the reason that he gives? He says, for this is the end of all mankind, and the living will lay it to heart. His reasoning for saying this is this, that we all end up at the funeral home eventually. Death is the great equalizer for us all. Someday, our turn will come, and somebody's going to have to come to the house of mourning for us. Now, again, this is very kind of dark and macabre. I don't know. Again, you feel encouraged this morning. Isn't this so great? But listen, I hope it's helpful because this is what he says. And he says, this is how this is helpful. This perspective is helpful. Why? Because the living will lay it to heart. The living will give it some careful thought. The living who take hold of the reality of death, of our own mortality, of the fact that our time on earth is Hevel. When we have that perspective and don't forget it, it frees us up to live in light of our own mortality. Instead of fighting against the fact that we will not live forever, right? Instead of trying to prolong and extend as much and as best as we can, we come to terms with our own mortality and we live our lives in view of that. And that's why the teacher says it's better to go to the house of mourning than to the house of feasting. He's not down on friends at dinner, okay? That's not his point. His point is we have to live our lives now with the perspective that we will not live forever. He goes on to say this in verse 3. He says that sorrow is better than laughter, to which, again, we would tend to disagree. I would much rather laugh and enjoy things than to feel sorrow in my heart, would you not? Wouldn't it be better to just have a good belly laugh than to mope around in dark clothes with a cloud over your head? Isn't that better? But he says, no, sorrow is better than laughter. Why? For by sadness of face, the heart is made glad. What in the world? How does a sad face make your heart glad? Well, look, catharsis is good for the soul. Get it out, okay? That's one important thing. The second is this, though. When we have sadness of face, when we understand the sorrow, we come to appreciate the good things even more. And the heart of the wise is in the house of the mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth, of never coming to grips with your own mortality, because that is foolishness. So how do you want to be remembered? How is it that you want to be remembered when your day comes? When someone stands on a stage and says your name and has their 5 to 10 minutes of what they say about your life. When the eulogy is no longer about someone you love, but about you. What do you want to be said in that moment? And it's helpful to live in light of whatever that would be, so that what is said can be true of you. Sorrow is better. Sadness is better. The other thing that he says, or another thing, because there's a lot of them, another thing that he says is better is rebuke is better. Okay, shifting gears now. Okay, rebuke is better. Verse 5, what's he say? It's better for a man to hear the rebuke of a wise person than to hear the song of fools. For as the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of fools. This also is vanity. What's he saying? Well, look, it's good for us to receive helpful instruction, right? The rebuke of the wise. Somebody who can see and has some perspective over what's going on with us. Somebody who can speak into that present circumstance. Someone who can look at what's happening and say, you need to hear something in the midst of this. You need to see something that I don't know that you're quite seeing here. And that rebuke that comes, not in a judgmental kind of, finger pointing, sign carrying, shouting kind of perspective, right? But the person who can come alongside and call us out from beside and say, hey, are you seeing this? Do you understand this? Have you considered this? That rebuke, the instruction or correction of the wise person in a spirit of helpfulness is much better than hearing the song of fools. In other words, a constant refrain of the latest hits of good vibes only. We just have our own dance party and forget the world exists. We'll just carry on with what we're doing. Nobody tell me what to do. Nobody should bring me some correction. Nobody should give me some perspective here. Let's just carry on with the thing that's going. We'll just turn the music up, right? Because here's what's true of all of us is that we don't want to be told we are not right. Do we? We don't want to be told that maybe we're missing something. In fact, what we want is someone to say, you are completely justified in how you feel right now. You are absolutely right in what you're thinking. Let's just continue to sing that song together. We'll drum up some excitement because the problem is with everybody else. Not us, not you. There's nothing wrong here. Let's just turn up the music. And he says, for as the crackling of thorns under the pot, so is the laughter of fools. And this also is vanity. When you have thorns crackling under the fire, here's what happens. There's a lot of snapping and a lot of popping, and they burn quick, but they provide very little heat. And you're not going to warm the pot of soup or whatever's in the pot, right, to make it worth eating. And so if we just carry on with the song of fools, not listening to any rebuke or instruction or correction or perspective, if we just want to carry on telling everybody, tell me I'm right, agree with me, we'll move forward, we'll do what we want, right? It's just like thorns under a pot, crackling, but providing not much heat. There's a lot of attention drawn, and it sounds nice, but it's not accomplishing much worth accomplishing. And so the question then becomes, if rebuke is better, if the words of the wise, if somebody giving us that instruction or correction is better, are we actually listening to it? Are we open to it? Are we hearing it? Because being open to correction makes you and me better. But we got to be willing to receive it, and that is why the rebuke, because nobody likes it. Do they? Nobody likes to be told you gotta see this differently, or you have to understand all of the rest of this. We don't like that so much. It gets a little uncomfortable for us, but the rebuke of the wise is better than the song of fools. Another thing that's better beyond rebuke is patience. He says in verse 7. Okay, you see this mattering happening here? Surely, he says, oppression drives the wise into madness, and a bribe corrupts the heart. Right? And so oppression or injustice or things happening drives the wise into madness. There are ensuing emotions that come out of bad things like bribery and shady stuff. It makes us mad. It drives us mad, right? Not just like anger, but like we're going mad. Like you would say, I'm losing my mind over this. Anybody ever been there? Okay, I'm going to lose it. I'm going to lose my mind. It's all driving me crazy. I just can't, right? And he says, surely oppression drives the wise into madness, and a bribe corrupts the heart. But better is the end of a thing than its beginning, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. The person who bides their time, the person who waits for the right moment, the person who is not quick to rush ahead, to rush into an experience or to run with an agenda to achieve a particular outcome, to push themselves all the way to the front of the line ahead of everybody else or to move the line along. Right? It's the person who's patient and bides their time and looks for the right moment and the right opportunity is the one. That is better. It's better. The end of a thing is better than its beginning, because at the beginning there's a whole lot ahead that's got to be dealt with and worked through and moved toward and be patient about and all the rest. But when you get to the end, you can look back and see how helpful it was. He goes on then in verse 9 to comment on this, and he says, "But be not quick in your spirit to become angry, for anger lodges in the heart of fools." It gets stuck or lives in our heart, and it is foolish. It's foolish to carry anger around. I mean, we know this, but how often do we do it? Just so ripped up about that. Ugh, can't believe, right? But it lodges itself in there. And like every moment and every opportunity that there's even a hint of something, it just kind of leaks out of us. And he says, look, don't be quick in your spirit to become angry. That is not going to be helpful, because if anger lives in your heart, that's a foolish thing to allow it to happen. He says, don't say, why were the former days, the past, before this, why were the former days better than these? Because it's not from wisdom, he says, that you ask this. Because the reality is that for all of us, like, we tend to idealize the past when we're discontent with the present. You ever notice that? The circumstances right now, the thing we're dealing with right now, the problem I'm facing, the person who's the thorn in my flesh, the issue at work, the financial stress, pick the thing, right? The present day, and we just we look back and go, it was so much better when we could. Or when we did, or when it wasn't, or when it was. And he says, don't look back and idealize or romanticize the past just because you're disgruntled with the present, because that is not a wise thing to do either. Because every era, every age, every moment has its light and dark sides. And we are quick to forget the dark side of a thing that's in the past when the present seems like the dark side of a thing. He says, look, don't keep looking back and going, why were the days better then, when we had it good when? It's not a wise thing to ask. What we need to do is look for the opportunity in the present. Like, so where are you and I romanticizing the past in order to just feed the disgruntledness about the present that we're experiencing? Because when we do that, it keeps us from the opportunity that lays before us. And anger lodges in our hearts, and we begin to do foolish things. But not only is patience better, and rebuke better, and sorrow better, but wisdom is better as well. He says, wisdom is good with an inheritance, an advantage to those who see the sun, who see the bright side of things, right? Wisdom is good. It is helpful. It gives us a perspective on life that is good and positive and helpful. Wisdom can do that. For the protection of wisdom is like the protection of money. Money is a measure of certainty, is it not? Like, no, we don't put our trust in riches and in wealth, but doesn't money provide some means of certainty for certain things in life? Sure, right? The protection of money can protect us from a bunch of things, like losing your house, losing your car, getting stuck somewhere, you're on vacation and your credit card stops working and you can't fly home, or, fill up your car with gas. Nobody can do that these days anyway, but like the protection of money is helpful, and wisdom in the same way can be helpful. Wisdom protects us from certain things, and there is an advantage of knowledge that wisdom preserves the life of him who has it. Like, having wisdom and gaining wisdom gives you an advantage in life. There's a measure of longevity to life that can be acquired because of wisdom. There is a quality of life that can be acquired because of wisdom, right? And even if it all leads to death, gaining wisdom is better than not gaining wisdom. And the teacher has said, not only here, but in Proverbs, like, seek wisdom. Chase after it like riches. Bind it around your neck. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And so it's just, my son, listen to my commandments. Pay attention to what I'm teaching you. Listen to what I have to tell you. Get wisdom. That's the first step in being wise. Get wisdom. Seek after it with all of your heart. Don't just kind of meander through life saying, we'll figure it out as it goes. Like do the wise thing. Think it through. Do your best to gain all the perspective that you can. And so the question then becomes, if wisdom is better, if it does provide certain advantages and some kind of protection, the question is, have we taken responsibility for us? And more to the point, have you taken responsibility for you and for your life? So don't be a fool, thinking it's just going to all work out. Right? There's got to be some applied wisdom to that will provide an advantage and a measure of protection. But at the end of the day, although sorrow is better, and although rebuke is better, and although patience is better, and although wisdom is better, knowing God, he says, is best. It says in verse 13, consider the work of God. Think it through. Don't be too quick to have complaints or to make snap judgments about present circumstances without considering the divine perspective. Don't be too quick or too rash to get angry. Don't be too quick or too rash to decide on certain things without considering the work of God. Because at the end of the day, who can make straight what God has made crooked? Now again, doesn't that sound a little weird? Isn't it God who always straightens what's crooked? Why is he saying who can make straight what God has made crooked? That sounds like the opposite. Is he indicting God on charges of, sin or messing stuff up here? Is that what he's doing? No, he's just simply saying, look, in life there are good things and there are difficult things. There are unexpected disruptions. There's stuff that happens that in our best planning, in our best gaining of wisdom, in the most patient we can be, in hearing the best wisdom and having the perspective of our own mortality, of everything that he said before, he's saying we still can't figure everything out. And his point is that we cannot stand in the way ultimately of God's purposes. Like, God is God, and you are not, and I am not. And God determines the course of history. Many plans can a human being make, but it's who that determines his steps? The Lord. And so when things are good, and you're looking out and like you see the sun, in the days of prosperity, he says in verse 14, be what? Joyful. Be glad. Don't despise that. Man, when life is rolling as you want it to, when you're happy, when people around you are happy, when all of that is going well, be joyful. Consider it pure joy. But also, as James would say, consider it pure joy, my brothers, when you face trials of many kinds, right? Because in the day of adversity, when things go sideways, when it gets tough, when you're not sure, when you're trying to figure it out, what does he say? God has made the one, prosperity, the day of prosperity, as well as the other, the day of adversity, so that man may not find out anything that will be after him. God has a purpose in it all when things are going well and when things go sideways, and we are not able to stand in God's way as somehow to disrupt or disorder his plans and purposes. And God, the teacher says, in his perspective at this point, God has done that so that we can't predict with absolute certainty what the next day is going to hold. The future is something that we don't have control of like we think we do. And I know that's not the most helpful and encouraging and joyful thing to hear. But listen, it's true. And if we take the perspective that in the good and the bad and the ugly, that God is at present and at work, seeking to accomplish something of his purpose and of his great value and of some end that he's pulling it all to, wouldn't you much rather be swept into his purpose in the prosperity and in the adversity than to just simply float through life doing the foolish thing? Wouldn't that make a whole lot more sense? Maybe? Or have I lost you now? Are we still good? I know it's a little warm in here. Okay, I'm just trying to help us see the wisdom in this, right? He goes on to say, in my vain life, not that, you think this song is about you, don't you? Okay, not in that way, but in my short Hevel life, the fog, the mist, the vapor that it is that I'm here and then gone. In my vain life, I have seen everything. I've seen it all. I've lived long enough to know that there's nothing new under the sun. Oh, there are new things, don't get me wrong, but in a general grand scheme of things, none of them accomplish great purpose, great meaning, great significance in and of themselves. And so in all of my vain life, I've seen everything. There is a righteous man who perishes in his righteousness, and there is a wicked man who prolongs his life in evil doing. That just seems backwards and wrong, doesn't it? Right? The righteous person's life is cut short, while the evildoer just keeps going on doing what he's doing and seems to succeed and gets further ahead, and everything just goes as he wants to plan. It's an injustice. It's not right, but he says, I've seen it. But so he says, so be not overly righteous. Don't make yourself too wise. Wisdom's better, but don't be too wise, okay? No, just stick with it. Why should you destroy yourself? In other words, look, wisdom is helpful. Wisdom's advantageous, but don't, again, in your pursuit of wisdom, get caught in the trap of thinking if I can be completely wise, then that's going to solve all the problems. He's not saying don't be wise. He's just saying if you put all your eggs in the wisdom basket, there's going to be trouble. You'll end up driving yourself mad, realizing that wisdom doesn't have all the answers. But he says, but don't be overly wicked either. Neither be a fool. Now, he's not advocating here like a little bit of wickedness is okay on the weekends, as long as you come to church on Sunday and figure out the rest, That's not what he's saying, okay? But what's he advocating here? Look, if you're just gonna, don't go all out foolish, okay? Let's just think about this for a second. That is it, right? It is good that you should take hold of these things. And from that, withhold not your hand, for the one who fears God shall come out from both of them. The person who fears God will come out from under the overly wise and the overly wicked. We will come out into a space where fear of the Lord dwells and he directs our paths. Wisdom gives strength to the wise men, more than 10 rulers who are in a city. Surely there is not a righteous man on earth who does good and never sins. True? Even the best of our best have the bad days and the bad moments, right? And the foolish things that happen. The people that we want to hold as the best examples even have their own brokenness. Don't take to heart all the things that people say, lest you hear your servant cursing you or somebody else cursing you. Your heart knows that many times you yourself have cursed others. He's not advocating it's okay. He's just saying a little bit of perspective here. Okay? Don't hold the opinions of others too highly, because you know that in the same way you've treated others the same. All this, he says, I have tested by wisdom, and I said, I will be wise, but it was far from me. That which has been is far off and deep, very deep. Who can find it out? In other words, in all my wisdom and all my seeking and all my experiences and all the rest of my pursuit of wisdom, look, here's the wise thing I discovered. I can't know it all. I just can't. I turned my heart to know and to search out and seek wisdom in the scheme of things, and to know the wickedness of folly and the foolishness that is madness. And I find something more bitter than death, the woman whose heart is snares and nets, and whose hands are fetters, and he who pleases God escapes her, but the sinner is taken by her. Behold, this is what I found, says the preacher, while adding one thing to another to find the scheme of things, while I kept searching and looking and trying and experiencing in order to figure out the whole scheme of life, which my soul has sought repeatedly, but I have not found. It's a chasing after a wind, always running but never catching. One man among 1,000 I found, but a woman among all these have not found. See, this alone I found. Here's his conclusion at the end of chapter 7. This is what I found, that God made man upright, but they have sought out many schemes. And well, God has a plan and a purpose that he will accomplish. And he is moving history towards. There are days of prosperity, and there's days of adversity. There's the good and the bad, right? There's the rebuke that is necessary. There's the patience that is going to be helpful. There's the wisdom that's helpful. There's this perspective of our own mortality that's going to be helpful. But knowing God is best, because human wisdom has its limits. And we cannot figure out the whole scheme of life. I'm just telling you. If you've spent your whole life trying to say, I'm going to have it nailed down by the time I'm done, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but you're not going to get there. It's been tried many, many times over. And as much as we want to have every minutia of everything and every reason why this happened or that happened or this is happening or what's going on, and I don't know what God's doing or what they're doing or what I'm even doing, like I just can't figure it out. We've got to be content with the mystery of that sometimes. Because I'm just in my own experience, sometimes I think if we had the answer to the thing we wanted the answer for, it probably wouldn't fix it all, would it? Like there's this sense of mystery. That life is a bit of an enigma under God. And we got to be, in many ways, content to live with that. But in the midst of the prosperity and the adversity, in the midst of our seeking of wisdom, in our hearing of, in the midst of all of it, consider the work of God. Because again, who can make straight what he has made crooked? In the day of prosperity, be joyful. In the day of adversity, consider God has made the one as well as the other, so that man may not find out anything that will be after him. Wisdom does not always preserve life because things happen. As much as it might preserve life and give us an advantage, it is not a guarantee that life will be preserved. Wisdom does not always correct life. Why? Because human beings are prone to sin. Wisdom does not always give an explanation. Why? Because God's ways are higher than our ways. But there is an advantage. There is some perspective to be gained from things like sorrow and rebuke and patience and wisdom. The question is whether or not we will receive it. And if we truly want to save our lives, to discover forgiveness, to understand what it is that God is in fact doing from beginning to end, we will have to look above the sun. And in fact, the good news of the gospel is that it is the Son who stepped below. That he left heaven, the place where God's will is effectively done. In every instance, in every moment, and stepped down to this earth to live in the midst of the mess among us. And he himself bore our sins. He was patient. He felt sorrow. He offered us rebuke. He showed us the way of wisdom that is truly wise. In fact, he himself is the wisdom of God, which in many ways is a stumbling block, just like some of the things that the teacher has said here, because our gut response is like, that can't quite be right. But if we would trust and follow him, if we would look above the sun to the sun, we would begin to have the perspective that we need in all of life's prosperity and adversity. Let's give thanks to God. Father, we thank you this morning for the wisdom of this teacher. And Father, I know that as we hear some of these things today, just our gut reactions to shake our heads and go, I don't know. But if we take it in the spirit of which it's written, there's so much wisdom in that's advantageous to us. If only we would have the willingness to receive it. And so God, as we come to you with all of our prosperity, with all of our adversity, with all of the pieces of our lives that we think we have figured out and that we feel like it's completely out of control, for the things that we feel quite confident about tomorrow to the things that we have no idea what's going to happen next. God, may we trust and know that you hold it all in your hands, and that this world is not held together by any of us in this room. In fact, it is in Christ Jesus that the whole universe is held together. And so we trust him, we believe him, we want to give ourselves to following him. Give us the wisdom to know what to do with what we've heard today and the courage to do it. We pray in Christ's name. Amen.